Firstly, thank you everyone for joining me today to another episode of Fringe Legal Edge. This is a experimental series of indefinite length, which explores and talks with experts, leaders about ideas and actually practical tips on giving your practice an edge. So today I am delighted to have Debbie Epstein Henry as my guest. Debbie is the founder of DEH Consulting, a speaker and author. She's the executive consultant at Axiom and so much more. And we'll go into a lot more of that. So firstly, Debbie, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we spoke earlier this week just briefly, and I had a great conversation with you then. And one of the things that stuck in my mind from that conversation was this importance about storytelling. And I know even on your website you talk about stories and how much you like to tell stories. So I think that's probably a good place as any to begin. Tell us your story. What brings you to this path today, and yeah, just a abbreviated version of that. That'd be wonderful.
Sure. And again, thank you so much for having me. And I do really love stories because I find that if you find them relatable, then it's so much more impactful for your own life to be able to take those lessons from that. So I'll share a little bit about my background. So I'm a former commercial litigator, first in New York and then in Philadelphia. And in 1999, I just had my second child, and I was sort of frankly miserable practicing law. I was on partnership track. I had been full-time in New York. I went on a part-time schedule at my Philly law firm. And despite really liking my colleagues, the substantive work was just not particularly interesting to me. And I was really challenged in how to play an integral role in my kids' lives, but also stay on that partnership track. And I felt that my generation, Gen Xers, were sort of the first generation that was trying to do both well at the same time. And I occasionally would have lunch with three other litigators at my firm and talk about sort of what works for us, what doesn't. And I decided, I'm going to start this network for lawyers interested in work-life issues. The first event will be at my firm in July of '99. And I sent an email out to these three lawyers at my firm, three other lawyers in Philly. I was a fairly new transplant, knew virtually no one, and said, the first event is in July, come to my firm. Within a few days, 150 people emailed me back in response. And work life wasn't even really a term of art. So I knew that something was going on and I was clearly not alone. And so I started running these monthly events that ended up being hosted by the 22 largest firms in Philadelphia. And it was largely women who attended, and it just morphed. And NPR Morning Edition did a story on this group that had no name after about a year of it going on. And then I just knew that there was something else going on. So after 3 years of doing it pro bono on the side while practicing law, I started doing public speaking and writing and stopped practicing. And by 2008, this network of 150 plus Philly lawyers was now over 10,000 lawyers nationally. And it was sort of a pre-viral world. And so again, it was really, in my mind, speaking to the tremendous yearning for lawyers looking for ways to look different and work differently and have nonlinear career paths. And women were sort of the canaries in the coal mine on this discussion, and it was mostly because of child rearing. But when the market crashed in 2008, a guy who I had summered with at a New York law firm, Gary Berger, contacted me, and he said he and I had summered at Weil Gotshal, then he started his own law firm, and he was running his own law firm then. And he said, there's this weird thing going on. He said, with the market crashing, increasingly clients are asking to borrow my lawyers. And I don't want to decline them because they go elsewhere, but I only have 20 lawyers working at my law firm. Can we work out a revenue share where we can tap into your network? And Gary had a law firm colleague, Susie Scanlon, and the three of us started dispatching lawyers from my network to Gary's law firm clients. And this was 2008. By 2011, the demand became so great that we started a company, Bliss Lawyers, as a separate entity where we formalized that process and started sending lawyers around the country. And I promise I'm almost done. But what I'll say is that what was fascinating over the next near 9 years that we ran Bliss Lawyers is that the demographic of the lawyers who are looking to work differently completely changed. And it really became baby boomers who were looking to phase into retirement to work on temporary engagements at in-house legal departments or law firms. We had millennials who wanted to work differently. And we had all sorts of lawyers, diverse lawyers increasingly, who wanted to work and build their careers differently. And in February of 2020, Axiom, our biggest competitor, bought our company right before the world imploded. And so that's a little bit about me. And it's been a really interesting, fun ride. And I really have just enjoyed seeing the profession evolve. I think we have so much more good work to be done, but it's been a very organic period of evolution, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and there is so much, and obviously, there's something that spans for a decade plus. There's so much to unpack. But firstly, I guess congratulations on the acquisition by Axiom.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've read some of the press around that, and it seems like a great thing to do. And I think as you were talking, one of the things I wrote down, one of the many, was this notion of there was something going on, right? As you grew from this 3 to 6 to 150 to 10,000 plus.
Right.
There was something going on, this sort of instinctual feeling that you had. And I think that's very relevant today, as we spoke about earlier this week, that there is something going on again.
Right.
And there, the world has changed, has moved on to a more, I guess, more collaborative and more open place in some ways. So we're hoping that we can make other people understand what's going on and help facilitate that a little bit. And that ties into the other thing I wrote, which is lawyers are looking to work differently, right?
No
Or they were
question.
at that point. And I don't think that trend has changed. So I think those are certainly two of the things I wanted to talk about, because as you built Bliss Lawyers, then it was built as a virtual firm, right? So
Yes.
a virtual offering.
Right.
And that is certainly the reality today. And even today, there's been news of many firms that are essentially mandating, and companies mandating, that, look, we are happy to go full virtual, right? We don't want anyone to come back to the office ever again. I don't think that's going to be the norm. But yet, help us understand and help me understand, what was the reasoning for the decision at that point? And it could just be that it just made the best sense. And how did you then structure not just the business entity, but how did you build this culture and the mindset for all of the people that you would onboard over, X amount of years?
Right. And thank you. It's interesting. And just a clarifier on that. So when we built Bliss and we formed the company officially in 2011, we did build it on a virtual platform for our corporate team. So ultimately we had 26 people on our corporate team who worked from around the country. And that was anybody from the person heading finance to business development and talent, et cetera. Everybody internally was virtual. Our lawyers actually, for the most part, worked at our clients' offices, both in-house legal departments and law firms. About 15% of our lawyers who were engaged around the country did work virtually, but it was more that my two partners and I, the three of us who co-founded the company, we ran the company for this near 9-year period on a virtual basis. And there were a lot of interesting learnings from that. And it was deliberate from the beginning. We felt that this was, first of all, we had all historically worked virtually for a period of time, and we loved the control and flexibility that we had in our own lives. And we wanted to give that to our corporate team. And we felt it had enabled us to be the parents we wanted to be and to develop the interests that we had outside of work in a way that was really fulfilling, but also do great work and deliver great client service. And we wanted to give our corporate team that same satisfaction. But we also knew that it would benefit both our lawyers who we employed as well as our clients. So our feeling was, we took what is often the largest expense of a company, which is real estate, and we said, let's charge our clients less. Let's actually pay the top of the market, the lawyers who we hired as our W-2 employees to work for our clients, because then we'll get the best lawyers. And so that was really very deliberate. And it was something that a lot of people historically, at least when they used to work flexibly or remotely in a work-life context, it was something that was stigmatized. We were just the opposite. We put it out there as a key part of our brand, as we're saving you money. We have, we're paying our lawyers to attract the best lawyers. And we've got a corporate team that is so phenomenal because they really appreciate the culture that we've created for them.
And I mean, so I think that those are great points, and I really like the fact that you incorporated that as part of the brand and the offering, because that makes it even truer rather than just sort of putting it out as a press release, essentially.
Right.
How do you balance that against, so there's a great positives and there's other positives of being virtual. How do you balance that against the pushback that you might get, certainly in a law firm context, of we don't know if people are doing enough work, we don't know if they're
Right.
working hard enough, there's sort of this notion of micromanagement essentially as it comes to be, and that may be the
Right.
natural inclination if someone is so used to managing a local team rather than a virtual team,
Right.
that they can see the individual and now you can't. So they may, I guess, over assess what they need to do and become too overbearing. How do you balance that?
I think it is a challenge. And by the way, I definitely don't minimize the importance of in-person contact. And what we used to do at Bliss, and what I'm recommending for employers that are going to this fully virtual model indefinitely, is once the world resumes, to be able to intersperse in-person interaction. So usually we flew in the corporate team 3 or 4 times a year, and we had 2 to 3 day strategy sessions where we had a mix of high level discussions about the strategic plan of the business, but also had a mix of fun activities that, just were more about getting to know each other better and things like that. And then many of us traveled, including me, for work. And so we'd have these sort of cluster, smaller gatherings in person when we happened to be in a different city for one reason or another. So I do think there's a really nice balance of that. But to more your question around this issue of really anxiety, are people playing hooky, or are they doing their work and things like that? It's interesting. Years ago, there was a study done of clients, and they were asked, how do you feel about working with part-time lawyers who were law firm lawyers? And clients said in that study, we actually feel the same way of our outside counsel that are full-time as we do their part-time. All we care about is quality of work, and beyond quality of work, we care about responsiveness and accessibility. As long as those three things are not impeded,
Yeah.
essentially all of our outside counsel are part-time. So from the client's perspective, and I think about that as a guide all the time, I think when you have a virtual work environment, number one, quality of work cannot be negatively impacted, and in turn, the results that follow from that quality of work. Otherwise, it is about responsiveness and accessibility. Because let's say we're working together, Ab, and you're a senior partner, and you send me something that you need me to research. If I just sit on it and don't respond to you and send you back the completed work product, which is excellent, 2 days later, you're just like, wait, is she there? What's going on? Whereas if I sent a response back within 5 minutes and said, just want to let you know, I've got this on my plate, I think it'll take me 2 days to turn it around. Does that work for you? That's being a good communicator. That's being responsive and accessible. And that allays that anxiety. But one other thing that I think is interesting about your point, and I've done a lot of work consulting to law firms around the world, and I always think it's quite ironic when law firm lawyers in particular are worried about virtual work, because most are still heavily reliant on the billable hour.
Yeah.
And as you know, the firm generates the same revenue wherever you bill. So it's actually a very feasible way, as long as there actually is work to get done,
Yeah.
to be able to ensure that productivity is the same or greater or less. It's very evident. It's actually much harder for in-house environments and other corporate settings where there isn't an easy measure like that can compare, what did it look like pre-COVID, let's say, and post-COVID.
And I think that becomes really important, especially for in-house teams, because and in most instances, it's difficult to measure the quality of work. You're never really getting that feedback from your clients, whether you're a law firm or in-house, on whether it's not like being at school where your work gets graded.
Right.
So if you take away sometimes the perception of busyness, right, it's difficult to know how much you're actually moving towards a target. And I think a lot of firms I've worked with, they can do that with the billable hours or having other metrics, and in-house as well, having some sort of a data-driven approach to, are we going in the right direction, becomes more important and should be more important to how long do we need to spend in order to get there.
But it's funny, in running this corporate team for nearly 9 years, I never had a question about who our best performers were, and none of us were billing hours, And it was just, you knew who was rock solid and you knew if somebody had some gaps. It really was very clear. And I think the focus for employers who are worried about this issue in this environment is really less about, is somebody good or not? You'll still be able to know that. Are they being productive or not? Those things are actually readily apparent. The bigger issue that I would encourage employers and management in particular to be focused on is building that culture, making sure your team feels engaged, because there are a lot of subtleties that are lost, even with the video communication, which is a really nice substitute, but it's just not the same as in person. And so focusing on culture and community and engagement is critical. And as leaders, having the right mix of conviction and humility, those kinds of things in this environment, particularly given not only COVID, of course, but Black Lives Matter and what's going on with the racial issues around racial inequity. This is a time of heightened sensitivity where employees are looking for more value-driven employers, and employers who miss that and think that, oh, well, there's furloughs and, unemployment is high, so we don't have to really worry about our talent. They're really being short-sighted.
Yeah. And I think I would add another word in there to engagement and anxiety, removing anxiety. And that's about trust, right? It goes down to, do you trust your team members? And of course it has to be earned and it needs to be maintained to be able to just get the work done. So I think that's probably why there was a strong feeling that we know who's rock solid, because there was enough trust that I don't need to see them online.
Right. No, I think one of the things that's really a mistake, I think, that people have who are used to working in a traditional office and now are sort of upended by this whole virtual environment, is there's a lot of actually trust and increased trust and closeness that can be gained from this new environment. So normally you're not speaking to people when they're in their homes. And so it's much more natural to, have a kid run across a screen or things like that. And then that prompts a conversation like, oh, I can't believe how big your son got, or whatever it may be. And so I am encouraging people to really seize on the opportunities that are presenting. Because you're in people's homes, you have an invitation to have those conversations that maybe historically would have been really out of place or awkward, but now they make sense. And it's sort of fun. And it's a way to bring some levity and sort of casualness to these relationships, because you're no longer chatting with them in the coffee, getting coffee or at the water cooler. So how else are you going to replicate that informality of relationship building that's so important to getting the real work done?
And I think it just makes work more human. That's basically what it comes down to, right?
Absolutely.
So, and one of the things I wanted to, certainly I see a lot, both in the press and in practice, is one of the downsides, I think, of remote work is people struggle with having barriers. And that is to say, it's too easy to just work 9 till 9 or 9 till midnight every single day. There's no weekend. There's no disconnect between your environment. So it's difficult to sometimes disconnect from what is work and what isn't.
Right.
And I look at that from a employee happiness and a health and well-being point of view, because that leads to burnout. And absolutely, that's a big issue, has been for a long time in legal. So how did you manage that? And especially you were saying that, that was one of the initial things for you in work-life balance.
Sure. I mean, one of the things we did at Bliss, and I really encourage other employers to think about, and if your employer is not going to adopt this, to at least do this in a self-imposed way wherever you can, is we actually had an email restraint policy. We forbade internal email communications from the corporate team on the weekends. And, you held something in draft or put it in and set it on a schedule to go out on Monday. But as you know, email begets more email. So even if your employer won't adopt that kind of policy, I never send an email to a client or anybody unless it's time sensitive on the weekend, because I don't want to bother them in case they're trying to recoup and regroup and sort of replenish, which we all need much more because our physical surroundings are not changing the way they typically do. But so I impose that on myself, and I do find it then slows the communication with others. The other thing that's really important is we're all sitting behind our desks much more than we typically would be, and we're not traveling, et cetera. So it is increasing the volume of emails. So again, by showing your own discipline and not gratuitously copying people who don't need to be copied on things, that's really important. I'm also sort of queen of the subject line of emails. I'm like really a focus on this, that I try to send, and I recommend other people do this to increase efficiency, is in the subject line of the email, it says kind of everything you need to know, because when people are scanning their emails, they're like, do I need to open that or not? Or enticing them to open it. All of those kinds of tricks bring more courtesy. But beyond the email thing and sort of, having that email restraint or putting some discipline around it, I think the other thing that's critical is that people are talking about this sadness about losing the natural transitions in their day that they automatically had when they worked in a traditional office, whether it was through commuting or grabbing lunch with a colleague, and all those sort of start and stop points. And what I really encourage people to do is impose their own discipline
Yeah.
on themselves. Have start and stop times, have break times, and force themselves to do other things that will actually engage them outside of work, whether it's exercise or playing music or gardening or playing, with your pet or whatever it is. Creating parameters around your day is essential. It's not just essential for your work productivity and to minimize distractions and burnout and things like that. It's critical for your happiness, and it's something that really is essential. And the one other thing I'll say along these lines where I see people having more success is when they pay more attention to the natural rhythms and routines of
Yeah.
their body. So I'm, for example, really an early morning person. I do my most important work right when I get up, because I know, I'm really not going to be able to write that article in the
Yeah.
afternoon because I'm useless. So paying more attention to when you are productive is really critical as well.
Yeah, and I think one of my friends, Sophie Trubisky, she spoke at the Fringe Legal Summit, I think in May, around having rituals, because that to her was like you're essentially transposing what you would do in the physical world, and yes, you're still physical, but you're not moving as much. So how do you bring some of those start stop points, as you put it, back to your life today?
I think the other thing is being able to be creative with this time that we've all had, this sudden change. And so there's been a lot that's sort of been taken away.
Yeah.
But what can be gained here? What new rituals can you adopt? We have on my side of the family a nightly call, and I feel more connected to various nieces and nephews than I did before, because we just have this default time. Anybody who can call in that each evening calls in. Not everybody does, but it's just kind of this placeholder where we can reach out and connect. There are different things, many of us are, using Duolingo and doing all these things. Like, I've been wanting to learn Spanish for years, and I'm now on day 85 because I'm just like, let me take in something new, because these other things are not there. So I think for those people who can really seize the space and really adopt new things of interest or things that are on their to-do list that they just didn't have time or inspiration to do earlier, that can be a really positive outlet and a way to sort of complement, again, some of the drudgery of, every day's blur's day, that kind of feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is such an important point, right? This is a great time to go and explore hobbies and get to your bucket list of things that you can do from your home, or in a safe environment that you wanted to do for a long time. And the millions of examples of what you can do. So if you need help finding a hobby, let me know. I'll have a few suggestions for sure. Okay, so we have about 5 or so minutes left. One of the other things I did want to touch on was this idea of, we already talked about work-life balance, right? And as you were, and I liked the inception of your story, which I didn't know, that essentially your colleague had come to you that clients were looking to borrow lawyers.
Yes.
How has that changed? What is the talent pool like today compared to what it was a decade ago or even 5 years ago? And how do you think firms and clients should think about adjusting? And I'm thinking more from a mindset perspective, but also from essentially a practical perspective of thinking about hiring people in the future?
Sure. I wrote a piece in 2017 called The Evolving Legal Talent Pool. And I think it really goes to this issue because I did see the women as the canaries in the coal mine. And they were really the first to say, this is an unforgiving career path. This doesn't need to be this way, the way we are practicing law. And that's really what I've seen transform in running Bliss, is that now it's okay for everyone to stand up and say, I don't like this. This is not an appealing way to be, and have more of what I talk about, like a patchwork career.
Yeah.
So I think it was initially the women who were mostly doing it for caregiving reasons, but now we have, millennial men are much more engaged in parenting than their predecessors, and millennials generally have had much more freedom in the way they approach their careers. So we saw that millennial demographic really being drawn to this temporary talent model. And at a company like Axiom, often the lawyers may be working on a temporary basis for as long as a year, and these are W-2 employees. So it's a much different complexion of what a temporary lawyer looks like. But like I said before, we've got baby boomers who are saying, like, hey, maybe my 401ks don't look like I thought, or maybe I don't want to just transition to board work. Maybe I want to have some composite career that has all of this sort of interesting mix of work. The other thing that's interesting is we had many law firm lawyers who had been trying to get in-house for years, who couldn't get in-house without in-house experience. And they were saying, what, this is a 6-month gig at a Fortune 500 company. I'm going to leave it, even though, this is a full-time permanent job at my law firm. And what they often found, which was interesting, is they got up the courage to give notice at their law firms, and their law firm said, hey, by the way, if it doesn't work out at that Fortune 500 company, you've got a spot back with us, because, they wanted that Fortune 500 company as a client. So I think there's been a change in the appetite for risk, which I see really exciting. I think that historically lawyers have been more risk averse. And I think part of the luxury, frankly, when there's been a disruption like there is right now, is to have people say, what, nothing really is secure. So maybe I'm finally going to try something that I've been wanting to try. And so there's a freedom and more of a receptivity in a disruptive environment to feel like, okay, maybe I'll treat this as a pilot, or the world is upending anyway, and I'm really going to tap in more thoroughly into the needs that I have and the interests I have. And it's refreshing. And I think that I said this before, that, there's a short-sightedness, I think, to certain employers, like, we have just kind of this flush talent pool right now. We don't have to worry about it. But what I see, and this comes back to your question, is sort of about recruiting and attracting talent. In the speaking that I do, I find the skills that lawyers want to be trained on more than anything right now is not just the substantive skills, but how do I develop strategic alliances and sponsorship relationships? How do I develop executive presence? How do I network better and make an ask effectively? How do I manage my time better so that I can have more happiness at home and at work? And those are the kinds of qualitative issues that people want answers to. How do I effectively self-advocate without being that obnoxious self-promoter? Those kind of ways to navigate your way in a workplace in an effective and powerful way. That's where I see the emphasis being, and employers who want people to be talent, to have a talent pool of lawyers who are not just doing great legal work, but actually building a great legal team. Those are the employers that are focusing on all those extra qualities.
Yep. And I mean, that could be an episode in itself, but I think overall, just exploring what the future of legal culture looks like is such a thought-provoking topic right now. And I really like this, how you phrase about the sort of temporary talent pool. It's essentially moving into that gig economy type model, which obviously popularized by Ubers and others of the world. And I think it's not just the lawyers that are becoming more or less risk averse, but I think the risk profile of the entire market is shifting, right? As they become completely accepting of the unpredictability of everything.
Right.
They just want to be able to look for opportunities where there are some. And I think in most instances, those individuals who are able to see some of those opportunities, whether it works for them long term or not, it's okay,
Right.
are rewarded generally because they also learn other skills. And the last thing I would say is it is, and you touched on it, it's about becoming more than just a lawyer. There is much more and specialization than ever before. One of my
Absolutely.
colleagues, Alma Seichu, I think her and I are speaking next week on essentially how do you think about all of the new job titles that have emerged and this very specialist roles that have emerged that frankly didn't even exist like 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? And they're there for a reason. They do serve a purpose and not just there as a marketing piece.
In a word, it's agility.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I know we're at time. So thank you firstly, Debbie. Before we wrap up, could you give people a guidance on, what's happening next with you? And if they want to find out more, where should they go? And yeah, if you're speaking next, feel free to talk about that as well.
Sure. Thank you so much. So again, what a pleasure to have this conversation, and congratulations to you on building your whole profile and your podcast. And
Thanks.
it's wonderful. For me, anyone interested in hiring me for speaking or consulting, they can go to my website, which is my name, DebbieEpsteinHenry.com. I run a speaker series that's international and webcasted, so people can sign up for that, as well as law firms and employers. And I'm launching a podcast in the fall called Inspiration Loves Company. So that'll be announced on my website and social media. So people should, are welcome to connect with me and learn all that. But emailing me through my website is probably the best way to get in touch. And I hope we have another opportunity to talk soon. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching and listening, and have a wonderful weekend.
Terrific. You too.
Bye-bye.